Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today for the listening session on the transitional shelter site at Juniper Ridge. We appreciate you being here and being willing to share your input with us. My name is Michaela Oliver. I'm the Community Relations Manager with the City of Bend, and I act as a liaison for the neighborhood associations and the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance. So I am here as your staff support inside City Hall, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. So first, I want to run you through some guidelines for everyone that is attending today. You will be on mute when you first join the meeting. Please make sure that your microphone or phone stays muted while others are speaking. The meeting host will also monitor microphones. There will be time for questions and comments after staff update on the feasibility of a transitional shelter site at Juniper Ridge. Instructions to ask questions and provide comments will be provided when we get to that part of the meeting. And as a reminder, this listening session will be recorded. For those of you who are interested in having closed captions, the instructions for that is on the screen. And then our agenda today is really short and sweet. We want to make sure that you get the most time to share your input. We're going to start with a feasibility study on Juniper Ridge presented by city staff, and then we'll move into the questions and comments for our listening session. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Today we have John Skidmore, Chief Operating Officer, Carolyn Egan. Oh man, I lost all my titles, so I can't be really official. Carolyn Egan, they're going to be giving us the main presentation today. And then we have a number of staff who have attended in support of the meeting to help answer any questions that you guys may have. And so with that, I will hand it over to John to take us away.
Great. Thanks, Michaela. And Carolyn Egan is our Director for our Economic Development Department. And Carolyn is going to take slide 1, and Carolyn and I will be tag teaming throughout the presentation, which should take up roughly 25 minutes or so. And then we'll turn it over to the public who want to provide input. So Carolyn, take it away.
Thanks so much, John. And hi, everyone. As John said, I'm Carolyn Egan. I serve as the city's Economic Development Director. And we wanted to start off a little bit just sharing some information that we have about homelessness. As we've shared information with the community about the city's goals around addressing homelessness, there's just been lots of comments that we've received. And understandably, not everyone in our community has all the information that we might at the city about the members of our community who are experiencing homelessness. And so what we use is a point-in-time count. It's done one night. And the goal of that is to count all of the community members in Central Oregon experiencing homelessness so that we get a sense of where they are, who they are, and just understand how the problem is, what the problem is that we're facing in Central Oregon. The last time we did the point-in-time count was in January of 2019, so before the COVID-19 pandemic hit us. And so what we learned there was that we had about 1,000 people experiencing homelessness on any one night in Central Oregon. We know that that's a vast undercount. That wouldn't count people who are staying in a motel because they don't have a place to live, or maybe staying with a friend or relative because they don't have a home of their own. But based on that 1,000 count number, we know that a large number of those experiencing homelessness are children. For me, it was really astounding to learn the number of unaccompanied youth who are experiencing homelessness, and really also to understand how many students in our schools are experiencing homelessness. Unfortunately, as we've all seen throughout the community, those 1,000 individuals and family members who are experiencing homelessness, they're not the only ones experiencing homelessness today. We have had an increase in the number of community members experiencing homelessness in the last 9 months. And as many of you are aware, we currently in Oregon have both eviction and foreclosure moratoriums that are set to run out at the end of the year. And so potentially have thousands more members of our community who may be homeless if they're not able to stay in their current residence. So as we think about how we address this problem, we are thinking about those who are right now having to live outside or living in their cars, and also understanding that we may have a whole lot more community members who are in that situation as we move through next year. So back to you, John. Thank you.
To avoid feedback, I hit the mute button, so I apologize. I'm going to provide a little background in terms of really how we got here, and provide an update on the City Council direction from our October 21st meeting, where we walked through a lot of different items related to just a variety of issues out of Juniper Ridge. At first, as Carolyn mentioned, we are seeing an increase in the members of our community who are experiencing homelessness. There's a variety of factors, but COVID is definitely playing a part of that. And moving forward, how these eviction moratoriums, how these foreclosure moratoriums impact additional members of our community, we'll have to wait and see. But that was definitely an issue that that was worthy of discussion with the council, and the increased camping that we've seen in Juniper Ridge. And over the years, we've seen the number of campers and campsites increase. We also have going the North Interceptor construction. So that's a large sewer line that we are constructing through Juniper Ridge that will provide a lot of needed sewer service for our fast growing city. But as part of that process to construct the North Interceptor, we needed to cordon off pretty much the entirety of Juniper Ridge that's within the city limits, because we have extremely heavy machinery. We have rock crushing going on. We have 30, 40 foot trenches that are being dug. It's just not a safe place for people to be, whether you're recreating or living out there. And so there was a very, I would say, detailed and legalistic approach that we had to take in order to move campers off of that southern portion of Juniper Ridge, so that our North Interceptor construction could commence and work through Juniper Ridge, which is currently underway now. Associated with that were fire risks. And I think my guess is most folks on the call are going to remember the August 15th fire that was caused by one of the campers' RVs. The catalytic converter sparked a brush fire, which grew. We got extremely lucky that we were able to contain that. That was before the fires out in Santiam and along the Mackenzie. So we had multi-agency response that even a few weeks later we would not have had. So we were very lucky that we didn't have more loss than we did. But the fire risk issues at Juniper Ridge are pretty significant. And speaking with our fire chief, he's mentioned that the fuels are pretty immense. We've also got a lack of really good access throughout the property. So it's a bunch of Jeep trails that kind of meander throughout. It's just from a fire risk issue or fire risk standpoint, there's a significant issue out there that's only exacerbated if people are out there with warming fires and cooking fires. So that's something we need to address. As part of that, there's the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad that runs through Juniper Ridge. The city has 2 licensed crossings, so we just don't have the ability to cross that wherever we would like to. As the property owner, we've worked with BNSF to obtain licenses to cross at 2 specific points. And you typically don't hear from the railroads too often, but we heard from them twice this past summer. Once when one of the campers' RVs got high centered on the railroad, and the actual train wasn't able to slow down before hitting it, and had to push it a mile or so we could get it off the tracks. We got a call from them then wondering about how we're managing our crossings. And then after the fire, they contacted us once again, and the conversation really started out as, we'd like to talk about revoking your licenses. As the property owner, we can't have those licenses revoked. We need access to that northeast portion of Juniper Ridge. And so we have worked with BNSF to come up with strategies to better manage those crossings. And that entails swingable, lockable gates that we're in the process of procuring currently. Eventually, we need to lock those gates, and we'll have keys to those who need access, such as our first responders or utility workers. But we obviously can't close and lock those gates if there's a bunch of people camping behind it. And so there's a legal process that we need to follow, and it seems to be changing through case law. But generally, we can't move folks off of Juniper Ridge unless we have a commensurate number of beds where these folks experiencing homelessness can legally sleep. We can't create a situation where they have to find somewhere where they can get cited if they are sleeping in an unauthorized area. So that's the challenge, and that's the reason we started focusing on Juniper Ridge, is looking to kind of replace those beds so that we had someplace legal for these people to sleep. Moving on to the city manager's order, the city manager declared an emergency due to the COVID pandemic. The city council endorsed that or ratified it. And Section 18 of that emergency order provides some flexibility for the city to use its property to provide siting areas for transitional housing and other facilities to help address the issues that the members of our communities experiencing homelessness face. And so that Section 18 is what we were looking at to rely on to establish this temporary transitional shelter site in Juniper Ridge. Carolyn, do you have anything to add to that? Did I miss anything?
I think I wanted to add sort of a little bit of a response to some of the comments that we heard. So one of the comments we heard was that council or city staff brought this proposal to council without talking to the neighborhood. And as you look at the next slides around the property, if you're a private property owner and we wanted to ask you to do something on your property, we would just come ask you. In this case, you have to sort of put yourselves in our shoes, but the city council is the owner of Juniper Ridge. And so in order to have permission to even explore the feasibility of a temporary transitional shelter site at Juniper Ridge, we needed to first ask the council. And so it really did feel awkward to the neighbors and just to the community at large that we would ask the council if we could do this before we talked to the neighbors. But truthfully, the first time we could talk to the neighbors was actually after we got permission from council. So really just, I appreciate the concern about that awkwardness and the timing, and just wanted to make sure we had just a minute to clarify that point. So thanks so much, John.
Thank you. Next slide, please, Joshua. So just to provide a little context, I'm sure most folks are familiar with Juniper Ridge, but on the left is the map that shows the area within Juniper Ridge that's within the UGB, which I believe Joshua is outlining with his cursor there, so thank you. At the roundabout at Cooley and 18th, you can see the Les Schwab headquarters, and then further north is the Sutera headquarters. So, but Juniper Ridge is larger than 500 acres. So to the map on the right is the entirety of the area of Juniper Ridge that the city of Bend owns, which is 1,500 acres, more or less, 1,000 acres in the county, under county jurisdiction, and 500 acres within the city limits. You can see on the map on the right, you can see Highway 97 running kind of northeast, and then the BNSF rail line a little to the east, kind of paralleling that. So that's just to provide locational context. And then if we could move to the next slide, please. So this is the area of 500 acres that's within the city limits. The red line that's running east to west and kind of heads north right there, thank you. That is the alignment for the North Interceptor. And so prior to construction commencing for the North Interceptor within that area of Juniper Ridge, you can see the little blue and black dots that are spread throughout the Juniper Ridge property. And these were the camps that we saw, or the camps that were established on that property prior to moving forward with the construction of the North Interceptor and working through that process of providing notices and having to move the campers off of that site and out of the construction zone. So if we can move to the next slide, what we've seen is there was a number of those camps moved north. And so we have a concentration of these camps that moved onto the northern area of Juniper Ridge, which created some challenges, including, you know, the fire that we mentioned, the issues with the rail line. So this is the situation we are in now, and these are the camps that we need to work with in order to maintain our licensed crossings of the BNSF rail line. So Carolyn, you have anything to add? Nope. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. So on October 21st, staff had a presentation with council, and we were seeking direction on a number of items. First, as Carolyn mentioned, we have to go to the owner of the property to ask if they want to consider things before we start going through the work to evaluate what that proposed use would be. So council provided direction to staff to pursue the temporary transitional shelter site, look at the feasibility, what types of services are going to be needed, what agencies can provide those, what needed sanitary facilities are going to be required, what type of infrastructure do we need to build, how much is it going to cost, what are the timelines, all these things that go into your basic feasibility study for any type of land use or development proposal. Carolyn, do you want to walk through the city-led task force direction?
Yeah, thanks, John. So the other recommendation that we got from council at that time was for the city manager to put together a task force of high-level social service professionals who have budgetary authority in their agency to begin to put together a list of recommendations for the city and for other public agencies on how we may address homelessness more effectively. As you can imagine, with homelessness, there's dozens of different funding streams. The county has done the job that it can do, but it's time for probably the next generation or the next level of coordination as we address this. And so we are looking to put together that committee right now, we're thinking about how to put it together over the holidays. And many of you are aware that we are waiting for a new council to be sworn in. And so as the new council is sworn in and as things settle in for the beginning part of the new year, that is when we'll have that committee begin to meet. We're imagining a short-term 12 months and really a set of recommendations to the city manager and potentially other county and city managers across the county, so that we have a coordinated approach. Those recommendations then would be taken to the elected officials to see how we want to move forward, but really trying to modernize our approach countywide to implement programs to address homelessness.
Great, and that's a good segue, Carolyn, into this third bullet point where City Council really indicated that they want to look at a longer-term homelessness action plan. And as we seat a new council in early January, my guess is that we will be talking about what does that long-term homelessness action plan look like? What resources does the city bring to this? What resources do other agencies bring? What resources do the social service providers? And how do we create a better set of infrastructure to address those folks within our community that are experiencing challenges from a housing or homelessness perspective? And the one thing that I'll say is that the city isn't really a social service provider. We're not a public health agency. We do have an affordable housing advisory committee, and we've focused on a lot of housing issues, but this homelessness issue is something that's really outside of our core services. And I think we'll be seeing council and staff and members of our community thinking creatively about what role the city should play. And one resource we do have, the city does have some relatively large land holdings that could be one piece of a broader solution to help site, whether it's a transitional housing site, a temporary shelter site, affordable housing, you name it. The cost of land tends to be one of the biggest barriers in trying to work through these types of solutions. And so as a public entity that has a good amount of land, my guess is that our land holdings will be involved in those conversations moving forward, including Juniper Ridge. So let's move on to the next slide if we can, please, Joshua. So the feasibility considerations, what did we do as staff to try to figure out if this site makes sense? And all of these, the partnerships, public safety, all of these items need to be answered with significant detail. In order to move forward with any of these facilities or any types of facilities, we need to make sure that we have the social service agencies providing the support that we need, and as well as what the members who are experiencing homelessness, what do they need, what case management is needed, what services need to be provided, and what contracts can we put together so that we establish the roles and responsibilities of the various stakeholders that need to all come together to address these issues. Public safety how do we deal with security concerns? How do we deal with public safety issues within any type of a transitional camp or a transitional shelter? What do we expect of the residents? You know, what's their obligation? What's the behavior that's expected of them for them to continue to live in the facility? What management roles do the social service providers play in assuring that there's a level of decorum and behavior that we want to see? What are the costs of creating different types of facilities with a temporary transitional site? You know, it's the idea was that it would be a lower level of development, but what do we need in there? Do we need porta potties? Do we need hand washing stations? What are the management costs of those long term, and how do we pay? We, as the city of Bend, we don't have a line item in our budget for these types of investments in our community, and so we have to get creative about how we work within our existing budgetary constraints to see if this is something that the city can take on. Construction, again, what level of construction are we shooting for? How do we pay for it? We don't, it's going to take time to get through contracts and procure someone to get out and do all the work that we need for these items. The timing is a huge issue, and we'll get into that in a little bit. The North Interceptor construction for this particular site that we've been looking at. When will they be moving along that North Interceptor along the alignment so that there's room for us to get in there and work? What's the issues with the emergency order? What's the timelines associated with that? What happens now that vaccinations are out? How long will that emergency order be in place? So that's a really tricky one to figure out. And then again, as I mentioned, what resources do we have at our disposal? Well, we happen to have land. And so that all of those considerations kind of led us to focus on one particular site in Juniper Ridge. And if you could go to the next slide, Joshua. As you can see, the black cross-hashed area, and then there's some gray around it. Currently, that is being used as the rock crushing operation for the North Interceptor. Once the rock crushing operation moves north along with the alignment of the North Interceptor, what's left behind is a relatively flat site, a cleared site, and a lot of gravel that we have at our disposal to put to use for things like pads and those types of items. So we don't have, and we also have a contractor that's already done all that work. So we don't need to go out and hire somebody else. We don't need to find another piece of property. We don't need to figure out how to clear it and make it level. We've got some temporary access in there through roads. So that issue was taken care of. The location is outside of the area of Juniper Ridge that's covered by the CC&Rs and design review guidelines. So getting outside of that area was important because by the CC&Rs and the design review guidelines, this, a temporary transitional shelter site really wouldn't meet the intent of the design guidelines. So we focus on this site for a variety of reasons based on those factors of consideration. Because once we weighed all those, this seemed to be the place for us to focus our efforts. So that is why we focused there. Carolyn, you want to add something, please?
Yeah, so a couple other reasons. So one of the things we know about meeting the members of our community who are experiencing homelessness where they are is making sure we provide a location that is nearby where they currently are. And so this does provide the access to where, as you saw from the maps earlier, where we have lots of families and individuals choosing to camp. It also is a improved location from a social service provision standpoint. So right now our social service providers are having to use the Jeep tracks and all the other back roads that we have in Juniper Ridge to go out and provide their service to these individuals and families. And so having a location that is closer to the asphalt road and having a location that is closer to other services is desirable. And I think the other thing we wanted to do is as one of the reasons was definitely to reduce the fire risk. And so we could do that here by just getting those camps to be closer to a road network, if you will. So we could actually, when we had the risk of fire, back in August, the thought of trying to get to all of those individuals throughout that property was daunting, to say the least. So I think in addition to all the land use issues and construction issues that John talked about, location for social service provision was definitely another lens that we looked through to identify this spot. Thanks, John.
No, thank you. That's good clarification. Yes, I can say in speaking with our fire chief, that was definitely a desirable characteristic of this location, is the ability to get in and out for a variety of public safety concerns. So next slide, please, Joshua. So I'll get to the punchline, and then we'll walk through the various items that led us to that. But really, primarily based on timing, this site is not feasible for a temporary transitional shelter at this point in time, and I can walk through. But the biggest item is that we have a contractor that is working on the North Interceptor, and they're going to continue to use that rock crushing site through most likely April, maybe a little bit longer. So from our standpoint, that's the site that works best for all of our needs. They're not going to vacate it or stop using it for the needs of the construction project for a number of months now. So you've kind of got that timeline moving. And then the other timeline, it all comes down to COVID and our emergency order. Oregon starts providing vaccinations tomorrow. We just had the vaccinations that are being distributed. So we don't know what's going to become of this emergency order. I'm not saying that, come April, everyone's going to be vaccinated, but it's going to be, there's a lot of work that's left to be done to be able to use this site for this particular facility, and the amount of effort and the amount of time it's going to take to create a temporary transitional shelter at this site right now that might only be able to be used for 3 months, 2 months, basically the duration of that emergency order. Once that emergency order no longer exists, we don't have the authority to have this shelter in this location. So there seems to be a better opportunity for us to focus our efforts on this. And Carolyn and I have been talking about, we're not taking our foot off the gas. We're kind of turning the steering wheel and aiming at a different target. And so what our next steps that we're going to recommend to council is, let's not rely on this emergency order or some other emergency order that might come down the pike. Let's focus on our zoning and development ordinance and go through the public process that's associated with amending that code to allow a variety of housing and homelessness strategies, everything from shelters to managed camps to RV parks to more affordable housing types. Let's look at our base development regulations and add a lot of uses that currently aren't there into it. And Carolyn, I know that you wanted to chat about some of the limitations we have in our existing development codes for similar uses. So please take it away, and then I'll run through the other considerations.
Okay, cool. So one of the things, one of the reasons we don't see a lot of shelter beds in Bend is that our development code only allows them, those types of buildings under a conditional use permit. And we can do it in commercial and industrial areas, but they tend not to be places where you would normally want to cite this type of residential use. We also have some really antiquated language, I think, as John's discussing. So when our code was written, the phrase temporary transitional shelter site, we weren't even speaking that language yet. So we have lots of examples from other places that have better codes. The other thing that the code does, well, just simply the adoption of the code and the new code provides a public process. But then once the code is in place, it provides a lot of certainty for the nonprofit or the entity that wants to build the shelter beds or bring the shelter beds or manage camp locations, sites online, and provides a lot of certainty for the properties that may be adjacent to that location. So we're really eager to have our code modernized so that we can really begin to chip away more effectively at the number of shelter beds that we need in Bend, or we need to provide in Bend for all of Central Oregon too, as we move forward through this process. Thanks, John.
No, that's a great point. And Oregon's land use system has a lot of opportunity for public input. It's regular. Well, there's 19 goals and guidelines that oversee our land use system. Goal 1 is goal 1 for a reason, and it's public participation. So throughout the code amendments, as well as the processes to actually site a facility, on a specific piece of property, there's a variety of opportunities for people to be involved and try to influence the process. But let's walk back through those factors of consideration for the feasibility quickly. Signing contracts for services. It is not a quick process. A lot of our social service agencies are focusing on their daily work. So for them to get out of their core work and then focus on something different, just like we're trying to do, it takes a while. There's a lot of items to be worked out. And even if we could get on that site in April, we don't even know if we'd have those contracts established and signed by the time we wanted to open up. Security issues, they need to be tailored. We need to figure out what is the responsibility of the residents, what's the responsibilities of the management, and then also we don't want to overwhelm our police department, who have a lot of other things that we're focusing on. As I mentioned, budget's always an issue. We don't have a line item for this, so we would need to get a better understanding of those costs, and a lot of that has to do with the ongoing management from social service providers, and work with the council on future budget adjustments for these types of facilities. And then, as I mentioned, the biggest challenge from a timing standpoint, it seemed that we'd be better spending our time looking for long-term solutions versus focusing on an emergency declaration to allow us to site this that really probably only has a number of months left in it, maybe 6, maybe 9. But better to look at this holistically and in the long-term view than relying on emergency orders to site it in the near term. So next slide, please.
So if the temporary transitional site at Juniper Ridge is off the table for now, what do we have underway? And I think when we first brought this information to council, we were saying we're reviewing applications under the new Oregon legislation, which we affectionately call House Bill 4212. We have approved 2 managed camp locations in Bend through that law, and that's both Veterans Village and St. Vincent de Paul sites. So we brought 26 additional shelter beds online through those 2 camps. We have also approved through the emergency order a couple other sites across town that are allowing some safe harbor or safe parking to as a way to provide better services to those experiencing homelessness. We have the winter warming shelter open, and the efforts are underway to figure out how to keep that open past what we would normally think of as winter. And we are, as we mentioned earlier, thinking about that task force. One of the things that we had talked to council about being a future project, which has quickly moved up on our schedule, is the opportunity to acquire a motel and convert that motel to a homeless shelter. The state of Oregon has made funds available to do that, and we are finalizing our application. We have a partnership with Neighbor Impact, and we are going to ask to be part of that program that will allow us to acquire the motel, do renovations that may be required, and then potentially have funds to operate that homeless shelter for a year. We will need local funds to operate after the first year, but an opportunity that we couldn't pass up. We need to adopt the development code, as John suggested. And for those of you who are also watching what's happening in Juniper Ridge from an employment land side, the Planning Commission has just approved the code changes for Juniper Ridge, which will make it easier to cite employment uses in Juniper Ridge and open up a process by which we may be able to decide that all the land that's in Juniper Ridge is not needed for employment uses. Now, this is another very public process. If we were to change the zoning in Juniper Ridge away from light industrial to housing, the community would know. You would get notice, you would get a chance to talk about it. But one of the things that is happening at Juniper Ridge and throughout all of Bend right now is we need fewer acres for every job that we're adding. And so the 500 acres that we had originally envisioned needing for all employment, we may not need as much land to get the same number of jobs and may be able to open up land for residential uses. When that happens, then we will still look to siting a RV park / campground in Juniper Ridge, and we would look to parcel out and then donate land to affordable housing builders and others to build more housing units. So one of the real challenges that we have is that we do not have enough housing units in the community for families that are earning $30,000, 30% of AMI or less. For a family of 4, that's about $23,000 a year. So really, if you think about Deschutes County and their caseload, they have about 6,000 clients for all of Deschutes County Public Health, and many of those, if not all of them, would qualify for deed-restricted affordable housing at 30% of AMI and less. And so that's a lot of housing units we need at very low rents. And so, as John mentioned earlier, land price is a huge part of getting those units built. And if the city can parcel out and donate land, we have a higher likelihood of getting the other state, federal funds that we need to build those units. And so really making sure that we have very near-term solutions to provide additional service to those experiencing homelessness. And then we start to build out a more structured continuum of housing so that families and individuals can be more successful. So can you go to the next slide, Joshua? So as we think about the changes to the development code, as you can tell by the way we're talking, we've already looked at the code and we can see the changes. When the new council comes in January, we'll need them to say, yes, this is our policy direction, and we do want you to look at this code. We will have an extensive public outreach and participation as we think about taking the old language into the new language and what needs to be in that new language so that we can meet the broadest array of community needs and really begin to address homelessness. Then we'll also at the same time go through some really formal comment periods with the current city appointed committees, which are both on the neighborhood side and the affordable housing side. We would expect to be in front of the planning commission maybe sometime in the spring, and then have that new code ready for adoption this summer. That would mean that the soonest that us or anyone else in your community could apply for a managed camp or a new shelter facility would be at the end of the summer. And so really want to make sure that everyone who's participating in this call today keeps an eye on this timeline and participates as you need and as you want to as we modernize our approach from a land development side to allow for a wider array of housing types in our community. And that's I have, John. I'll hand it back to you.
I was just going to mention on if you could go back to that, the public outreach, what that process looks like, how council wants to shape it. It can go in a bunch of different directions. We could pull together a task force. We've done this with some other challenging issues like short-term rentals and the marijuana task force to figure out where to site dispensaries within the city and come up with clear and objective standards that we follow to cite different types of uses. And so council could choose to go that route. They could choose a more expeditious route. We're not entirely sure what that's going to look like, but rest assured, Oregon's land use system provides sufficient opportunity for those who want to be involved in the process to be involved, have their voices heard, and try to influence the outcomes of what this development code would look like. So I think the sitting council has definitely demonstrated a real interest in the city playing a large part in helping to find solutions. And my assumption is that this next council will probably be of a similar mind. So there will be a lot of conversations about this coming up. Next slide, please. So that concludes our staff presentation. And so what we'd like to hear is from you. After listening to the update, after understanding the feasibility that we went through, what comments do you have for us as we make recommendations to council to move in a new direction? So with that, Michaela, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, John and Carolyn. For those of you who are attending, this is your chance to ask questions and provide comment. Joshua is going to be putting up some instructions on the screen along with a timer. And then our recorder, Kayla Duddy, is going to be taking notes in real time. So you guys should be able to track that. Now, for those of you who are attending using a desktop or tablet, you should be able to go to your participants button at the bottom of your screen and click raise hand. For those of you who are calling in on a telephone, you can press *9 to both raise your hand and lower your hand. And with that, I am going to get started with the hands that show up first on my screen. So our first speaker is going to be Susan Whitwer. Susan. Oops, 1 second before we get started with that. Joshua, I would like it if you could give me co-host so that I have the ability to allow people to tap.
Are you ready?
There you are, Susan. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Susan Whitwer. I'm a resident of Bend and live in the Wishing Well neighborhood off of Morning Star. Thank you for your time. I'm encouraged to hear the recent developments, that there's going to be more thought and time put into this plan. And I'm also encouraged to see the issue of homelessness in Central Oregon get the attention that it deserves. We as a community need to step up and address this issue. I feel that the homeless site in Juniper Ridge will not solve the problem of homelessness, and that the temporary nature of a managed camp will only push any real solution further into the future. I feel that we need more shelter beds in Bend. I agree with that, Ms. Egan, thank you. And the temporary nature of managed camps does not address the problem of a lack of shelter beds. I think we need to aggressively pursue the option of buying a motel. I think we need to also pursue options that mirror the Veterans Village and the St. Vincent de Paul shelters. I would personally not be opposed to transitional housing being located in Juniper Ridge. My daughter attended a school that was located very close to Bethlehem Inn, and I feel like this was an enriching experience. We were proud to participate in service learning opportunities tied to the shelter. I think for homeless advocates, suggesting that those of us who live in neighborhoods surrounding Juniper Ridge are simply crying, "Not in my backyard." I'm surprised that there's not more advocacy for more reasonable and effective solutions. Let's see. Our community deserves better long-term solutions, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next, we have Stephen Eberhard.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Unbelievable. God, I fought this thing yesterday afternoon, the whole darn meeting. So I'm so happy to be heard. In any case, I live in Cascade Village. My backyard is Juniper Ridge. My house directly interfaces it. And I ride my mountain bike all over the area up until the construction. But, you know, we do have an issue. There's a lot of folks that are living out there. And for the most part, you know, because I do talk to them, you know, they're good people. They're just, you know, stuck between a rock and a hard spot. And when you don't have any assets or any kind of sway, I mean, it's hard to make anything happen. But on the other hand, you know, it's a difficult situation out there. I don't think anybody wants to live out there on purpose. But the fire that we had last summer brought a lot of realities to light. Like, how do you get a hold of these people when there's a fire? And you know, there's a bunch of, you know, public safety kind of things. You know, stolen bikes. You know, I'd like to see a program where if you have a bike in Bend, you have to have a bike license. It would be one way to start keeping track of bikes. If you're on Juniper Ridge and you have a bunch of bikes and no licenses, you know, it's not a good thing. It just perpetuates the current situation. But I was wondering if it would be possible. I know the GPS reception and the cell phone reception in Juniper Ridge isn't great, but if we had people establish a living situation and GPS coordinates for that in lieu of an address, maybe that'd be a way to, you know, keep track of folks and all that. My time's up, but you know, there are some interesting options that we could take a look at, and I'd be happy to work with that and you know, follow up on some of these opportunities.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, we have Jennifer Osner.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this presentation and for your work. This is a very critical city issue. I'd also like to echo support of previous comments from last night with some personal thoughts. I listened to Eric Gardy's comment, and I think it's important for the community to recognize that this isn't a proposed warming shelter. It would not necessarily save more lives from access to the cold exposure. It's a platform supporting camping. I also appreciate Mike Thatcher's comment to humanize the residents that need housing. I really support the city's efforts to pursue a task force and ultimately a housing program to encourage more affordable housing and supportive housing. Just recently thinking about the large space proposed for the new library in North Bend, I can imagine it could provide less surface parking and provide more, space for supportive housing. I really would like to see more opportunities such as the Veterans Housing Project, permanent warming shelters, and transitional housing, especially for women and women with children. Then next, I'd also like to echo Lauren Johnson's comment about last night. I really appreciate and took a lot from the advisory board's recent presentation on the development of Juniper Ridge. Thank you, Carolyn and Matt. And I, not related to my comments today, I would like clarification on what Carolyn responded to last night about who pays for the improvement fees and taxes at Juniper Ridge. And then this leads to my comment. So my understanding of the Juniper Ridge history management of the site is that we collectively as a city have been subsidizing development for this site. And so my concern is that a creation of an emergency transitional shelter here would have long-term ramifications about possible unmanaged camps offsite, which would ultimately stymie future development at Juniper Ridge, resulting in a compounded cost for the city. And my deep, deep, deep concern, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just go over my time just a minute, but or a few seconds, is that the fundamental rationale that I understand for the city proposing the emergency shelter at this location is the recent Oregon case law that, for lack of a better term, the city can't evict campers without providing an alternate location to live. And so I feel like this waterfalls for this site. So, what happens if this location can't provide sufficient housing for all of the residents in the Burlington Northern Santa Fe rail crossing? It seems like there's more people there than what this location can handle. And then also, there will inevitably be campers located outside of this location. It's a poorly, managed area with poor access for policing. And so once this location is fully occupied, where will additional campers be relocated to?
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Jill Martinson.
Good afternoon, all. Can you hear me?
We can.
I'm Jill Martinison, president of the North Point Homeowners Association. Thank you to city staff for continuing to gather input before tonight's recommendation. I've listened to both listening sessions, and am encouraged that you will not recommend implementing the plan for the Phase 1 temporary camp at Juniper Ridge. I hope this recommendation stands because neighbors and Juniper Ridge businesses believe that this poses an unreasonable risk to public health and safety, which House Bill 4212 prohibits. We have delineated our many concerns in letters to the city staff and the city council. Moving forward, there are, as you've explained, steps that must be taken before the Phase 2 RV park can be installed. We ask that you take into account prior to extensive planning, what neighbors in the Juniper Ridge businesses' concerns are, and get a lot of input from everyone, including the Juniper Ridge Management Advisory Board and members of the homeless population. Comments from people who don't live nearby and are unaffected by this should not be the primary considerations. Code amendments, as I understand, especially in this case, is basically the city asking the city for permission. So we do ask you to listen. Neighbors will still be concerned about RV campers who don't wish to follow any rules in a managed camp and then wander off to adjacent undeveloped Juniper Ridge, which is a fire danger and a safety danger. Neighbors will still be concerned about ensuring the safety of surrounding neighborhood children who need to walk and ride bikes to school because they're in the no bus zone. Finally, please know that many of us are aware that we need to be a part of a solution rather than just complaining. Please do, as you say you will, involve us and publicize it well in trying to find positive solutions that involve all areas of Bend, not primarily the east side. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jill. Up next, we have Dennis Douglas.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dennis Douglas. I'm a resident here in Bend for about 20 years. I'd first like to perhaps answer the question of Ms. Ostner's, who wondered about who's going to pay for it. I think we all know who's going to pay for these things, and that is Ms. Ostner, myself, you guys on the panel, and everyone else in Bend, and the county is going to wind up paying for this. With that in mind, I have two questions. Regarding the opening slide on the homeless statistics, what percentage of the people identified as being homeless are actually capable of working, but choose not to? It seems that I have very little sympathy for those in that category. I do have some sympathy for those who are placed in an untenable situation and it's just what they have to do to live, but not if they can work. So I'm not enthusiastic about a program that just says, here's some free stuff without some substantive information or details about how these people really need it. And my second question relates to the homeless area that you've defined. What prevents people from just free ranging within that area and going anywhere they want, just as they do now? So it seems to me like you can pose a defined area, you can put something in and have it there. But if the people choose to go elsewhere, they're going to go elsewhere. So I think that's a question that needs to be addressed by the city, by you guys, and so on. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
So, Michaela, I can answer the second question. So in terms of what prevents folks from free range camping in other areas of Juniper Ridge once we establish a transitional temporary shelter site, the existence or the creation of such a facility allows us to better manage the publicly owned lands than we can now, because by providing additional places where people can sleep, we can then trespass people off of that property because they have established facilities where they legally can go and reside. Until we have that ability, our hands are a bit tied in terms of our enforcement actions. So Sergeant Liz Lawrence, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but we need the supply in order to better manage our lands.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Up next, we have Erica Spate.
Hi there. My name is Reverend Erica Spate, and I live in the neighborhood. And I just wanted to register my comments as fully in support of whatever quick, adaptable solutions the city and its leaders can find. Thank you so much for this information. As far as we know, in my work as a pastor here in Bend, 15 of our neighbors have died this year while experiencing homelessness. One is too many, of course. And so as we move through these conversations, I really appreciate the empathy as well as the research that's brought to the conversation. So for me, as a resident of the neighborhood, but also as a person of faith, this is about acting quickly and adapting so that we can save lives. My understanding in working with service providers is that homelessness and options for housing for people is truly a continuum. So I appreciate the ways that you've spoken to that, that shelters will never be enough and affordable housing will never be enough, that we truly do need options for people to be camping safely, and that doing it in this way will help keep folks connected to services and connected in relationship. Again, I have the privilege of working with people who are at the camps, building relationships, connecting to medical and dental services. So keeping folks connected to services and to relationship, for me, that's the top priority. And I see the city prioritizing that. We need to do all of the above, everything that you've listed, but I want to register my support for acting quickly and adapting here at Juniper Ridge. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Up next, we have Jerry Drewliner.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Very interesting discussion. Thank you for all this information and for the work that you do. I think about in the whole spectrum of affordable housing and camps and everything, what will be the qualifications of people that allow them to participate in them? My concern is if we become, the shining example of how to deal with homelessness and housing in Bend, then we're going to attract more homeless to want to participate in the solutions we come up with. And not wanting to sound like I don't care, because I do care, but I look at your first slide about homelessness, and I think about the 360 homeless households with children as a beginning point of who should be qualified to participate in these things. Further, I think that you stated that the land is one of our greatest assets, and it's not just the city of Bend. We have a vast amount of federal land to our east that is available. And in fact, the homeless have shown us that they like to participate out there. It is untenable that they are out there without services and protection, and trying to get some line on what you need: heat, shelter, and food as your basic human needs. But I would say that I come down on the side at this point of more transitional housing, perhaps in a further out site that we can connect, that may come into more of a camp. And if you needed 360, then obviously the first goal would be to produce some kind of camp, perhaps with yurts or tents or something that was well qualified to handle people from Bend in families who, through no fault of their own, find themselves not able to find housing. The rest of those things come along down the road, but I think that group of people should be served first.
Thank you, Jerry. Up next, we have Shiloh Honeycutt.
Hi there, can you hear me all right?
We can.
All right, so my name is Shiloh Honeycutt. I live in the North Point neighborhood off a street that directly borders Juniper Ridge. And I guess some of our concerns, because we know the issue has to be addressed. We know there's been a lot of things that led to increased homelessness, particularly this year. But the vastness of Juniper Ridge, being as it is, presents what I would imagine is a great challenge and strain on our community resources from fire, police, and even for the managed camp director. I have yet to hear if there's a number given for that managed camp. I did speak with a woman that currently is in Juniper Ridge right now and says that there are over 100 people out there living. And I'm wondering if those services will provide what's necessary, or if you're then going to burden the area that, hey, we have this managed camp, we can only serve so many, but what happens to everybody else? I can see, like others have mentioned, concern that you're going to have these little areas close enough, but not properly monitored or safe. So that puts an increased risk for fire. My other concern was with the location being so close to two schools, I haven't heard if this is going to be considered a high barrier or a low barrier location, and would background checks be required for those that are going to be participating in the managed camp, as far as for safety of those living nearby and those kids? Is that something that's been considered? My next question was, given the emergency order from Section 18, are you still required to follow all safety measures that are normally set up and have to be reviewed, like fire codes, building codes, or does the Section 18 emergency order allow those kind of things to be bypassed? That, again, is another concern for us. And I think that's all I have at the moment. And thank you for your time and for allowing us to give some input.
Thank you. John, did you want to answer any?
Shiloh, maybe you missed the beginning of the presentation, but the staff's recommendation is not to rely on the section 18 component of the emergency order, and rather to focus our efforts on amending our development codes to go through the formal process of establishing, whether it's a temporary transitional shelter site or an managed RV camp or other approach to addressing the issues of homelessness and housing challenges. So we're not relying on section 18 for a variety of reasons, or that emergency order, primarily because that's going to come to a crashing end here in the relatively near future. And our efforts are probably better spent looking for long-term solutions where these types of concerns you have about whether it's a low barrier shelter, high barrier shelter, those can be addressed through the public process as well as the drafting of our development code to regulate such uses.
Okay, yeah, I did hear that portion, but I wasn't sure if that was a for sure deal or if it's just something that is being presented as non-feasibility. So that's why I wanted to present that. I wasn't sure if that had been formally decided by the city council or not.
We will present to them tonight, and we will see what their decision is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next, we have Lisa Foster.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thanks. My name is Lisa Foster, as you said, and I am here to advocate for humans in our community who are having to live outside in the winter. A town with so many resources should not have people who are having to, be chased away every night and who have a reliable place to camp in lieu of a permanent year-round shelter, which we lack in this town. It's really important that I feel like it's important that we live in a town that does not prioritize NIMBYism over lives. It's really important that the perception that a neighbor's property value might decline is not prioritized over actual current dangers being faced by members of our community. I'm aware there's also pushback by neighbors of the new temporary shelter at the Old Possibilities thrift store. I'm a renter in Bend, and I don't have the privilege of understanding what it might be like to worry about my property value declining, but I can't imagine prioritizing that over people's lives. Juniper Ridge is currently home to a number of individuals who have nowhere else to go. Temporary shelters have been set up, but it's reasonable for folks to be fearful of utilizing shelters during a pandemic. And in non-pandemic times, it's also reasonable that people might feel safer camping. Our community needs to come together to provide safe places for these folks to camp without fear of being chased off by police. It's virtually impossible for people to get back on their feet until they have a reliable place to sleep at night. And there's very little opportunity to make progress or find work when one is concerned with basic human needs like shelter and food. A reliable place to camp without fear of being displaced will allow people to begin to connect with services and get a leg up. No location will be perfect, and neighbors will fight against something that might lower their property values wherever this is cited, but inaction is not an option and delays could be deadly. Please allow these camps to continue and provide a safe place for our community members to sleep. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Up next, Colleen Sinsky.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon. My name is Colleen Sinsky, and I'm a Bend resident and homeless service provider. I want to thank city staff and council members for prioritizing this issue. Last year, over 500 households experiencing literal homelessness in Central Oregon sought help through our coordinated entry system. Almost none of them received housing support because the units don't exist, not because they are choosing to be homeless. I've personally had to say no, I'm sorry, to people who are living on Juniper Ridge and who have asked for help getting housing. I've had to add them to a wait list, fully knowing that it will not result in them being able to obtain a safe place to live. Our current system to address homelessness is failing and affects the entire community. The number of people sleeping outside in Central Oregon has doubled in the past 7 years. In addition, our region has one of the highest rates in the country of people who lack access to shelter beds. We don't need to worry about people flocking here for shelter services. In the US, around 37% of people experiencing homelessness have access to shelter. In Central Oregon, the number is a heartbreaking 70 out of 100 people who have to sleep outdoors because they lack shelter. We know of at least 15 homeless individuals who died in Deschutes County in the past year, and I believe that we can do better. I've worked with sanctioned transitional camps before, and I know that they can be successful with an appropriate level of investment. The residents can absolutely achieve stability and independence with the right support. A 2018 Guardian study of Portland and Seattle found that crime is actually more likely to go down in the neighborhoods that host a city-sanctioned encampment. Other priorities include a year-round low-barrier shelter, expanded options for safe parking. We know that 1 out of 3 people surveyed in the PIT count are sleeping in their vehicle, and developing permanent supportive housing for our chronically homeless population. This is a cost-effective, data-backed solution to end homelessness for individuals who have disabilities. I appreciate the city taking a proactive step towards addressing homelessness and look forward to partnering with the city and network of service providers. Thanks.
Thank you, Colleen. Next, we have Christina Johnson.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, my name is Christina Johnson, and I served as a member of the Juniper Ridge Advisory Board. I'm a member of the Boyd Acres Neighborhood Association and a design professional in the community. Like many others who have spoken, I can see that this is not a solution of all of homelessness in Bend, but I do believe that this site will be a desirable short-term location for some who are experiencing homelessness. It can serve as a fantastic opportunity in finding out what can become feasible in addressing these concerns through public and private partnerships, utilizing readily available resources. For these reasons and others, I'm here to advocate for pursuing this site as a temporary shelter and to ask my fellow neighbors and friends to just sort of open their hearts and their minds and find compassionate solutions for both the individuals who do experience homelessness and also for those who maybe fear what the consequences can be for providing nearby housing. And I think with that, we can help the city imagine what a well-managed camp can look like for persons who are looking for a safe place to camp. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. We have a couple of more hands up. I just want to make sure that you know how to raise your hand if you were hoping to. So if you're calling via phone, the option to raise your hand and pressing *9, that also lowers your hand. If you're watching a desktop or mobile device, there is an option under participants to raise your hand. So you have a chance to raise your question or comment to provide. And our next commenter is Paul Bastille.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah. I just don't want to take too much time. I'm a resident of North Point subdivision. My property is adjacent to some empty property that is Juniper Ridge. Not quite sure who owns it, Pacific Power or the city. And when they get straight on that, it would be more appropriate to respond to comments that way. I would just like to say that Jill Martinson and Lauren Johnson have made some incredibly profound statements, and I acknowledge and support everything that they have said. To me, it sounds like, and we've talked about this before, it sounds like the solution is Juniper Ridge, and we're going to rationalize the solution, whether it's temporary or phase 2 or phase 3. It's been a foregone conclusion on your part and the city's part that it's going to be Juniper Ridge. And I'd like to know what other areas were being studied, given the same feasibility study as Juniper Ridge was. And then the other question I just have was, in terms of people that do pay taxes and are privileged enough to own a house as opposed to rent one, has there been any survey done or polling done as to how many residents that actually live in this neighborhood are they in favor or not? So some people cannot get to a listening session, but it would be good to outreach to each and every individual that votes and that pays taxes to determine whether or not they want this phase 1, 2, or 3 to be in their backyard. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Looks like I have one more hand. Morgan Schmidt.
Hi, my name is Morgan Schmidt. I'm a resident of Bend. I also run Pandemic Partners, the Facebook group, and I'm one of the pastors at First Presbyterian Church. First off, I want to thank you so much, Carolyn and your team at the city for all of the work that you guys are putting into this, and for the momentum I think that this conversation is starting to have in terms of dignity and housing for everyone in Bend. And I'm about to have some really strong words, but I do want to acknowledge the uncertainty, the fear that I'm hearing in some of the neighbors that live adjacent to this particular location, even though this is just one part of the puzzle for the continuum of housing that we really need in this town. I hear you, and I hear that you have anxiety and questions and real fear about what might happen if this goes forward, specifically at the location in Juniper Ridge. I've had the privilege of sort of overnight and within 24-hour notice running interim emergency shelters at First Presbyterian Church this fall, one for the smoke emergency and one as an interim option before the winter shelter could open on November 23rd. And so from that experience, it was a bit of a crash course in what our community is capable of when we allow our better angels to speak and when we are willing to put the dignity and humanity of our neighbors above our own convenience and comfort. I have been so moved to get to know our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness, to get to know the incredible and overworked providers and nonprofits and city staff that are working on this and devoting their lives to it. And I know that we are able to do this, that there is money that can be moved around, that can be earmarked, that can be prioritized, that we have a city council, hopefully, that will put this at the top of their list moving forward, because I want to answer Jerry's question, who qualifies for housing? If you're a human being in Bend, you qualify for housing. We had an unfortunate joke at the warming shelter that people were allowed to bring their dogs in, and that in Bend we would have an easier time getting housing passed if we simply advertised a dog shelter where dogs could bring their humans instead of the other way around. And I don't want to live in a town like that. So when I say not in my backyard, I mean, I don't want to see anyone without safe, stable housing in my backyard. You can have my backyard. And so I am so grateful that we're centering this conversation. And I want to answer Jill's question too about whose voices should be prioritized in this conversation. And unfortunately, for those of you that are dissenting and somehow still unable to see that people living off the grid and without any kind of infrastructure or access to facilities or access to providers in an unsafe environment is somehow worse for your community than a place that is safe and managed, that logic doesn't even make sense to me. Even if you don't care at all about your fellow human being, that logic doesn't make sense in terms of the stability that this would bring to your community by giving stability to our neighbors experiencing homelessness. And it's my community too. Sorry.
You're fine, we appreciate you. At this time, I'm not seeing any more hands. If you do have a question or comment, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're calling in. Otherwise, I will hand it back to John and Carolyn to close us out today.
Great. So thanks everybody for participating today and providing your comments. Thanks to my fellow staff for working on this and going through the very detailed work of trying to figure out whether or not this is a feasible idea. We, as I mentioned earlier, we will be speaking with City Council tonight with a recommendation that we transition our efforts from this emergency siting ability or potential to working with our development code to allow for longer term solutions. So that I believe City Council starts tonight at 7 o'clock. And Carolyn and I will provide that recommendation and see what direction Council provides to staff at that point. So Carolyn, any closing words for you?
I just wanted to thank everyone for spending 90 minutes with us, not quite. And thank you for participating, and thank you for continuing to follow the issue. Thank you to listening to all of the sides. And thank you for your grace as we as city staff balance a whole new set of issues. John and I were talking after the last one. As city staff, we're used to being the referee, and we're being asked to act in a whole new role as we think about moving that steering wheel a little bit to expand our services into homelessness, and what does that look like. So thank you for being on that journey with us. Thank you for spending this time. Please attend the council meeting, and many of you have my email address. I've heard from many of you already. Feel free to contact me, John, or anyone on the screen at any time to get additional information so that you can have what you need to participate in the process. So thank you everyone for being here today.
Great, thanks.